At my son's wedding, my daughter-in-law demanded the keys to my apartment in front of 130 guests, and when I refused, she slapped me so hard that the sound echoed through the reception hall like a gunshot. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand how I got here. How a woman who spent 37 years saving lives as a nurse, who raised a son alone after losing her husband to cancer, who sacrificed everything for family, could end up standing in a parking lot at 9:47 p.m. on what should have been the happiest day of her life, watching her own son choose his new wife over the woman who gave him everything. My name is Evelyn Washington, and this is the story of how I discovered that sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who teach you who you really are. The day started like a dream. I woke up at 5 a.m. in my small apartment in Briar Hollow, Massachusetts, the same apartment I'd called home for 15 years. The morning light streamed through my kitchen window as I made coffee in the same ceramic mug Marcus had given me for Mother's Day when he was 12, the one with "World's Best Mom" painted in his wobbly handwriting. I held that mug between my palms and smiled, thinking about how my baby boy was about to become a married man. Marcus had found love with Brittany Coleman, a real estate agent from the wealthy side of town. They'd been together for 2 years, and while I always felt something cold behind Brittany's perfect smile, I kept my mouth shut. Love makes people blind, and I wanted my son to be happy. I wanted him to have what his father and I had before cancer stole Thomas away when Marcus was only 8 years old. I spent 3 hours getting ready that morning. I'd saved for months to buy the navy blue dress hanging in my closet, elegant but not flashy, appropriate for the mother of the groom. I did my own hair, twisting my silver-streaked curls into an updo I'd practiced a dozen times. At 58, I'd learned to find beauty in the lines around my eyes, the softness that came with age, the strength that showed in my posture after decades of long hospital shifts. The wedding was at Silverbrook Manor, a venue that cost more than I made in 6 months. I arrived early to help with last-minute details, my heart swelling with pride as I watched the staff arrange white roses and baby's breath. This was my son's day. This was everything I'd worked for. Marcus looked breathtaking in his black tuxedo, his father's watch gleaming on his wrist, the only thing of Thomas's I'd kept for him. When he saw me, his face lit up with that smile that had been melting my heart since the day he was born. "Mom, you look beautiful," he said, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like his cologne and nervous excitement. "My handsome boy," I whispered, adjusting his tie even though it was perfect. "Your father would be so proud." For a moment, we stood there in comfortable silence, and I felt Thomas's presence with us. I felt complete. The ceremony was everything a mother could hope for. I sat in the front row, dabbing at my eyes as I watched Marcus promise to love and cherish Brittany until death do them part. She looked stunning in her designer gown, her blonde hair cascading down her back like a waterfall. When they kissed, 130 guests erupted in applause, and I clapped the loudest of all. But it was during the reception that everything changed. The first hour went smoothly. I mingled with relatives I hadn't seen in years, accepted compliments on how well I'd raised Marcus, and posed for countless photos. The open bar was flowing, the DJ was playing all the right songs, and the 7-course dinner was more elaborate than anything I'd ever tasted. I was standing near the gift table, admiring the crystal vases and silver picture frames that probably cost more than my monthly rent, when Brittany appeared beside me. She'd changed into her reception dress, a shorter, tighter version of her ceremony gown that showed off her figure. Her cheeks were flushed from champagne, and there was something different in her eyes, something that made my stomach tighten with unease. "Evelyn," she said, her voice carrying a sweetness that didn't match the coldness in her stare. "We need to talk." "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, using the endearment I'd been trying to make feel natural for 2 years. "Is everything all right?" She laughed, but it wasn't the musical sound I'd heard during the ceremony. This laugh had edges. "Oh, everything's perfect. Better than perfect, actually. You see, Marcus and I have been talking, and we've decided it's time for some changes." The music seemed to fade into the background. Around us, guests continued laughing and dancing, oblivious to the tension building between us like storm clouds. "Changes?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Brittany stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the expensive perfume she wore, close enough that I could see the calculation behind her smile. Marcus and I are starting our new life together, and we need our space. We need to build our own family without interference. The word hit me like a physical blow. Interference? Don't play dumb, Evelyn. You know exactly what I mean. Her voice was still quiet, but it carried the force of a sledgehammer. The constant phone calls, the surprise visits, the way you baby him like he's still 8 years old. It needs to stop. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and confusion. I don't understand. I call once a week, maybe twice, and I only visit when he invites me. Once a week is too much, and those invites? She laughed again, that awful sound that made my skin crawl. He only invites you because he feels guilty, because you've spent his entire life making him feel responsible for your happiness. The accusation hit me so hard I actually stumbled backward. That's not true. I raised my son to be independent, to be codependent on you, she interrupted. But that ends today. Marcus and I discussed it, and we've decided that you need to give us some space. Real space. I looked around desperately, searching for my son among the crowd of dancing guests. I found him near the bar, laughing with his college friends, completely unaware of the conversation that was destroying me one word at a time. "What are you asking me to do?" I managed to say. Brittany's smile widened, and I saw something predatory in her expression. "I'm not asking, Evelyn. I'm telling. We want the keys to your apartment." The request was so absurd, so completely out of left field, that I was sure I'd misheard her. "Excuse me? Your apartment. We know you can't afford to live there much longer anyway, not on a nurse's pension. Marcus told me how you've been struggling since you retired. We're doing you a favor, really. We'll take over the lease and you can find somewhere more appropriate for a woman your age." The room seemed to tilt around me. Appropriate for a woman my age? A senior community, maybe. Or you could move in with your sister in Florida like you always talk about. The point is, Marcus needs to focus on his new family now. And having you so close? She shrugged, as if my entire life was just an inconvenience to be solved. I tried to speak, but no words came. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. "The keys, Evelyn," Brittany said, extending her manicured hand. "Hand them over, and we can all move on with our lives." That's when I found my voice. "No." The word came out stronger than I felt, clear and definitive in a way that surprised us both. Brittany's perfect composure cracked for just a moment. "What did you say?" I said no. I straightened my shoulders, feeling my mother's strength flow through me, my grandmother's resilience, the power of every Black woman who had ever stood up for herself when the world tried to make her invisible. "That apartment is my home. I've lived there for 15 years. I'm not giving you my keys." "You don't understand," Brittany hissed, her mask slipping completely now. "This isn't a request. Marcus wants this too. He's just too much of a coward to tell you himself." "Then let him tell me," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Let my son look me in the eye and tell me he wants me out of his life." Brittany's face contorted with rage. In that moment, I saw her for what she really was. Not the polished, perfect daughter-in-law I'd tried so hard to love, but someone who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. "You selfish bitch," she spat, loud enough that several nearby guests turned to stare. "You've controlled him his entire life, and you can't stand that he finally has someone who actually loves him." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Around us, conversations stopped. People were staring now, their faces a mixture of shock and uncomfortable curiosity. "Brittany," I said quietly, trying to salvage what was left of this moment, trying to protect my son's wedding day from the ugliness that was spilling out between us. "Please, not here, not today. Yes, here. Yes, today." Her voice rose with each word. "Give me those keys right now, or I swear to God, I'll make your life so miserable you'll wish you'd never been born." I felt every eye in the room on us. I saw Marcus finally notice the commotion, his face confused as he started walking toward us. I saw his new in-laws, the Colemans, watching with satisfied expressions as if this scene was exactly what they'd been expecting. And I made my choice. "No," I said again, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I will not give you my keys. I will not be bullied out of my own life. And I will not stand here and let you disrespect me on what's supposed to be the happiest day of my son's life." The sound of Brittany's hand connecting with my cheek echoed through the reception hall like a thunderclap. The silence that followed was deafening. 130 people watched as I raised my hand to my burning face, tasted blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth, and felt something inside me break that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. Marcus reached us just as the sting began to fade, his eyes wide with horror. "What the hell is going on?" Brittany immediately burst into tears. Real tears, I'll give her that, and threw herself into his arms. "She's trying to ruin our wedding, Marcus. She won't leave us alone. She's being so cruel." I watched my son's face, watched him look between his sobbing new wife and his mother, watched him make the choice that would define our relationship for the rest of our lives. "Mom," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "maybe you should go home. We can talk about this tomorrow when everyone's calmer." 29 years of raising him alone. 29 years of sacrificing everything for his happiness. 29 years of being his whole world, and he was choosing her side without even asking what happened. I nodded slowly, tasting salt from tears I didn't remember starting to cry. "All right, baby, I'll go home." I walked through that crowd of 130 people with my head held high, even though my heart was shattering with every step. I made it to my car in the parking lot before I allowed myself to fall apart completely. But I didn't go home. Instead, I sat in my car for 10 minutes, crying until I couldn't cry anymore. Then I dried my eyes, reached for my phone, and made a call to a number I hadn't dialed in 3 years. "Dr. Mitchell?" I said when he answered. "This is Evelyn Washington. I think it's time." 30 minutes after I made that call to Dr. Mitchell, a black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot of Silverbrook Manor, and I watched through my tears as a man in an expensive suit stepped out and walked toward the reception hall with the confidence of someone who owned the world. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about Dr. James Mitchell and why that phone call was 3 years in the making. It was October 2019, and I was working the night shift in the cardiac intensive care unit at Briar Hollow General Hospital. I'd been a nurse for 34 years by then, and I thought I'd seen everything. Heart attacks, strokes, overdoses, accidents. I'd held the hands of dying patients and celebrated with families when miracles happened. But nothing had prepared me for the man they wheeled into room 314 at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. He was unconscious, his expensive clothes cut away by the paramedics, his dark skin pale with shock. The EMTs said they'd found him collapsed in his office downtown. A heart attack at 45 years old. No family contacted, no emergency contact on file, just a successful lawyer who'd worked himself nearly to death. Dr. Patterson, the attending physician, shook his head after reviewing the charts. Massive myocardial infarction. He's not going to make it through the night. But something about this man made me stubborn. Maybe it was the photo in his wallet. A little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile, probably his daughter. Maybe it was the way his hand felt in mine when I checked his pulse. Strong, even in unconsciousness, like he was fighting to stay alive. Or maybe it was just instinct. The same instinct that had made me a damn good nurse for over 3 decades. I stayed with him all night. I monitored every heartbeat, adjusted his medication drip, talked to him even though he couldn't hear me. I told him about the little girl in his wallet, about how she needed her daddy to fight. I told him about my own son, about how losing his father at 8 years old had changed everything for us. "You don't get to give up," I whispered to him during the longest part of the night. When his heart rate dropped so low the machines started screaming. "That little girl is counting on you." At 6:42 a.m., his eyes opened. Dr. Patterson called it a miracle. The other nurses called it luck. But James Mitchell knew exactly what it was, and he told me so 3 days later when he was stable enough to talk. "You saved my life," he said, his voice still hoarse from the ventilator. "Not just medically. You stayed when everyone else gave up. You talked to me like I mattered." I smiled and adjusted his pillow. "Every patient matters, Mr. Mitchell." "James," he corrected. "And no, they don't. Not the way you made me matter. I heard every word you said to me that night. About fighting, about my daughter Zoe, about not giving up." He paused, studying my face with those intelligent brown eyes. "You mentioned your son lost his father young." I nodded, surprised by the sudden tightness in my throat. Cancer. When Marcus was 8. Then you understand what you saved. Not just my life, but hers. Zoe's only 7. She needs her father. We talked for hours that day. James told me about his law practice, how he'd been working 80-hour weeks trying to build something meaningful. He specialized in estate law, helping families navigate complex inheritance cases. He'd grown up poor in Detroit, worked his way through law school, and was determined to never be helpless again. I told him about Marcus, about raising a son alone while working double shifts, about the dreams I'd put on hold so my boy could have everything he needed, about the college fund I'd emptied to pay for Thomas's cancer treatments, and how I'd worked extra shifts for years to build it back up for Marcus's education. "You're remarkable, Evelyn," he said before I left that day. "If you ever need anything at all, you call me." He handed me his business card, pressing it into my palm with both hands. "I mean it, day or night. You saved my life, and I don't forget debts like that." I kept that card in my wallet for 3 years, never thinking I'd use it. James sent Christmas cards with pictures of Zoe, updates on his practice, invitations to dinner that I politely declined because I didn't want to impose on his gratitude. We were from different worlds, and I knew it. But sitting in that parking lot on Marcus's wedding night, my cheek still burning from Brittany's slap, I finally understood what James had meant about debts. "Dr. Mitchell," I said when he answered on the second ring, despite it being nearly 10 p.m. "This is Evelyn Washington. I think it's time." "Evelyn." His voice was immediately alert, concerned. "Are you all right? You sound upset." I laughed, but it came out broken. "I'm sitting in a parking lot outside my son's wedding reception. His new wife just slapped me in front of 130 people because I wouldn't give her the keys to my apartment. My son chose her side without even asking what happened." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "James? I'm here." His voice had changed, become harder somehow. "Where are you?" "Silverbrook Manor, but I'm about to leave." "Don't." The command was gentle but firm. "Don't go anywhere. I'm coming to get you." "James." "No. I didn't call for you to rescue me. I called because you said if I ever needed anything." I took a shaky breath. "I need to know about the investigation, the one you mentioned last Christmas." Another long silence. Then, "Stay right where you are, Evelyn. We're having that conversation tonight." The line went dead, and I sat there staring at my phone, wondering what I'd just set in motion. 25 minutes later, the Mercedes pulled up beside my 10-year-old Honda Civic like something from another universe. James climbed out wearing a perfectly tailored black suit, his graying temples giving him an air of distinguished authority that made heads turn even in the dim parking lot lighting. He walked straight to my car and tapped on the window. When I rolled it down, his eyes immediately went to my cheek, where Brittany's handprint was still visible in the fluorescent glow from the manor's entrance. "She hit you." It wasn't a question. I touched my face self-consciously. "It's nothing. I've had worse from confused patients in the ER. James's jaw tightened. "No, Evelyn, it's not nothing. Tell me exactly what happened." So I did. I told him about Brittany's demands, about the keys, about Marcus's choice to side with his wife without even asking for my version of events. I told him about feeling invisible, disposable, like 30 years of sacrifice meant nothing to the son I'd given my life to raise. When I finished, James was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on my car's window frame. "Do you trust me, Evelyn?" "With my life," I said without hesitation. "Then come with me. There are things you need to know, and after tonight, you're going to need all the friends you can get." I looked toward the manor, where I could see the warm glow of the reception still in full swing. Through the windows, I could make out figures dancing, celebrating, living the happy ending I'd been excluded from. "Will you tell me about the investigation?" James nodded. "Everything. But first, we're going to make an appearance at that reception. There's someone in there who needs to understand exactly who they just crossed." I felt a chill run down my spine. "James, what aren't you telling me?" He smiled, and for the first time since I'd met him, it wasn't entirely kind. "I'm telling you that Evelyn Washington isn't going anywhere, and after tonight, neither is anyone else in that room." I got out of my car and followed him toward the manor, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Whatever James had discovered in his investigation, whatever secrets he was about to reveal. I knew my life was about to change forever. As we approached the entrance, James stopped and turned to me. "Are you ready for this?" I thought about my grandmother, who'd raised 5 children during the Depression. I thought about my mother, who'd integrated the nursing program at her college in 1965, despite threats and harassment. I thought about every Black woman who'd ever been told to sit down, shut up, and accept whatever scraps life threw at them. "I've been ready my whole life," I told him. James nodded and opened the door to the reception hall. The first person to notice us was Brittany herself, who was dancing with Marcus near the center of the floor. Her face went white when she saw me walking back in, but when her eyes fell on James, tall, confident, and clearly expensive, confusion replaced her anger. Marcus saw us next, his brow furrowing as he tried to process why his mother had returned with a stranger who looked like he could buy and sell everyone in the room. But it was Mrs. Coleman, Brittany's mother, who reacted most strongly. She was standing near the head table when she spotted James, and I watched all the color drain from her face as recognition dawned. "Oh my God," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "That's James Mitchell." The name rippled through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. I could feel the shift in the room's energy as people began to realize that whatever was about to happen, it was bigger than a simple family dispute. James walked to the center of the dance floor with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a case. Marcus and Brittany stepped apart, both of them staring at this stranger who'd just crashed their wedding reception. "Ladies and gentlemen," James said, his voice carrying easily across the room without needing to shout. "I apologize for interrupting this beautiful celebration, but I have some important information to share. Information that concerns Mrs. Evelyn Washington." Every eye in the room turned to me, and I felt my grandmother's strength flow through my spine as I stood straighter. 3 years ago," James continued, "Mrs. Washington saved my life. She spent an entire night beside my hospital bed, refusing to let me die when every doctor in the building had given up on me. She talked to me about fighting, about not giving up, about the people who depend on us to keep going." The room was absolutely silent now. Even the DJ had stopped the music. "Since that night, I've been conducting an investigation on Mrs. Washington's behalf. An investigation into her family history, specifically regarding her grandmother, Rose Washington, who worked as a domestic servant for the Hartwell family here in Massachusetts from 1943 until her death in 1967. I felt my knees go weak. Grandmother Rose. The woman who'd raised my mother after my grandfather died, who'd worked for the same wealthy family for 24 years, who'd always whispered stories about someday, but never explained what she meant. James reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "Mrs. Washington, your grandmother Rose was more than just an employee to Cornelius Hartwell. She was his confidant, his trusted friend, and in his final years, the closest thing to family he had left." He opened the envelope and pulled out official-looking documents. When Cornelius Hartwell died in 1967, he left specific instructions in his will, instructions that have taken 3 years of legal work to verify and execute. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Around me, 130 wedding guests stood in complete silence, waiting to hear words that would change everything. "Mrs. Evelyn Washington," James said, holding up the documents, "you are the sole beneficiary of the Hartwell Estate Trust. As of today, you have inherited $1.2 million, plus the deed to the Hartwell Mansion on Elm Street, plus all remaining assets and investments." The world tilted around me, and if James hadn't stepped forward to steady me, I would have collapsed right there on the dance floor. "What?" I whispered. "Your grandmother Rose left these papers with my law firm in 1967, with instructions that they should only be opened and investigated if her family ever faced financial hardship or needed help. The Christmas card you sent me last year, mentioning your struggles since retirement, triggered the investigation clause." I stared at the documents in his hands, trying to process words that didn't seem real. Inherited. $1.2 million. Mansion. "I don't understand," I managed to say. James smiled, and this time it was the kind smile I remembered from the hospital. "Your grandmother, Rose Washington, was one of the most remarkable women I never got the chance to meet. According to Cornelius Hartwell's personal letters, she talked him through the death of his wife, helped him raise his daughter after she was born with special needs, and spent 24 years being the heart of his household. When he died with no living relatives, he made sure she would be taken care of. And when she died 6 months later, she made sure her family would be taken care of too. I felt tears streaming down my face, but for the first time that night, they weren't tears of pain. The inheritance was held in trust, earning interest and growing investments for 56 years, waiting for the right moment to change your life, James continued. Rose Washington knew that someday her granddaughter might need to remember who she really was. I looked around the room at all those faces, Marcus's shock, Brittany's horror, the Coleman family's disbelief. People who just watched me get slapped and dismissed were now staring at a millionaire heiress. But more than the money, more than the mansion, more than any of it, what mattered was this. My grandmother had believed in me before I was even born. She'd believed I was worth protecting, worth investing in, worth leaving a legacy for. I stood straighter, feeling the weight of 56 years of love and faith settling on my shoulders like a crown. "James," I said, my voice steady and clear, "what do I need to sign?" The silence in that reception hall stretched so long I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. But what happened next showed me exactly who my son had become, and it wasn't the man I thought I'd raised. Marcus stepped forward, his face twisted with something I'd never seen before. Greed mixed with desperation. Not joy for his mother's good fortune. Not amazement at this miracle that had just unfolded. Just calculation, like he was already figuring out how this inheritance could solve his problems. "Mom," he said, his voice carefully controlled, but with an undertone that made my stomach clench. "This is incredible. We need to talk about this privately, as a family." Family. The word that had meant everything to me just 2 hours ago now felt like poison in the air. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time in 29 years, I saw a stranger. The boy I'd sacrificed everything for, who I'd worked double shifts to put through college, who I'd held when he cried about missing his father, was staring at me like I was a lottery ticket he'd just discovered in his pocket. "We are talking as a family, Marcus," I said quietly. "This is my family right here. All the people who just watched your wife assault me and heard you tell me to leave my own son's wedding." Brittany recovered from her shock faster than anyone else, which should have told me something about her character right there. She plastered on that perfect smile and took a step toward me, her hands extended like we were old friends. "Evelyn, this is such wonderful news. I'm so sorry about earlier. I think we were all just overwhelmed with wedding stress. You know how emotional these days can be." She laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. "Of course you'll want to celebrate with your family. Maybe we could all sit down tomorrow and—" "Stop." The word came out harder than I intended, cutting through her performance like a knife. "Just stop talking." The smile slipped from her face. Around us, 130 guests stood frozen, like they were watching a car accident in slow motion. I turned to James, who was watching the scene unfold with the sharp attention of a man who'd spent years reading people in courtrooms. "James, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Always," he said. "How long have you known about this inheritance?" "I've been investigating it for 3 years, but I only had confirmation 2 weeks ago when the final documents were verified." 2 weeks. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "And in those 2 weeks, did you contact me?" "I tried to. I called your apartment multiple times, but you never answered. I finally drove by last weekend, but you weren't home." I thought back to the past 2 weeks, helping Brittany with last-minute wedding preparations, staying at Marcus's apartment to help with guest arrangements, barely spending any time at my own place because I was so focused on making sure everything was perfect for today. "Marcus," I said slowly, turning back to my son, "have you been screening my phone calls?" The guilt that flashed across his face told me everything I needed to know. "Mom, it's not like that. Have you been screening my calls?" I repeated, louder this time. He glanced at Brittany, then back at me. "Brittany thought it would be better if you focused on the wedding preparations instead of getting distracted by other things. Like a life-changing inheritance. Like messages from the lawyer trying to deliver news that would have changed everything." "What else?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "What other calls have you been screening?" What other parts of my life have you and your wife been managing for me? Marcus's face went pale. Mom, please. Not here. Not in front of everyone. No, here. Right here, in front of everyone, just like where your wife humiliated me an hour ago. I felt power building in my voice, the power of a woman who'd just discovered she'd been manipulated by the people she trusted most. Tell me what else you've been hiding from me. When he didn't answer, I turned to James. James, you said you drove by my apartment. Did you see anything unusual? James's jaw tightened. There was a "for rent" sign in the window. The words hit me like a physical blow. I spun back to Marcus, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. You put my apartment up for rent? My voice was barely a whisper, but it carried across the silent room like a scream. Mom, please, let me explain. You put my home up for rent without telling me? We were trying to help you, Brittany burst out, dropping her sweet act completely. You can barely afford that place on your pension. We found you a nice senior community in Florida, near your sister. It's much more appropriate for someone your age. Appropriate. I repeated the word slowly, tasting all its bitter implications. You've been planning to ship me off to Florida? Marcus finally found his voice. Mom, you've been struggling since you retired. We thought it would be better for everyone if you had a fresh start somewhere new. Without asking me. We knew you'd say no. So you decided to make the choice for me. About my life, about my home, about my future. I looked between my son and his wife, seeing them clearly for the first time. How long have you been planning this? The silence that followed was answer enough. I turned to address the room full of guests who were still standing there in shocked silence. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you all to witness this moment. I want you to remember that you saw a son and daughter-in-law try to steal a woman's home and ship her away to Florida so they could take over her life, all while she was grieving the death of their relationship. Mrs. Coleman stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Now see here, Evelyn, you're being dramatic. They were trying to help you. Were they helping me when they screened my phone calls so I wouldn't learn about my inheritance? I asked. Were they helping me when they put my apartment up for rent without my knowledge? Were they helping me when your daughter slapped me in front of all of you for refusing to hand over my keys? Mrs. Coleman's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I looked around the room at all these people in their expensive clothes, at the lavish decorations and 7-course meal that probably cost more than most people made in a month. You all watched a young woman assault an older black woman tonight, and not one of you said a word. Not one of you stood up for me. You just watched like it was entertainment. My voice grew stronger with each word, fed by years of being invisible, years of being taken for granted, years of making myself smaller so other people could feel bigger. Well, let me tell you something about entertainment. My grandmother Rose worked for 24 years for a white family, and when she died, she made sure her granddaughter would never have to beg anyone for anything. She made sure I would never have to accept scraps from people who think they can decide what's appropriate for my life. I turned back to Marcus, and my heart broke all over again when I saw the greed still there in his eyes, the calculations still running behind his face. You know what the saddest part is, baby? If you had just been honest with me, if you had just asked instead of scheming and manipulating, I would have shared everything with you. I would have made sure you were taken care of, because that's what mothers do. Marcus's face crumpled. Mom, we can still— No. I held up my hand. We can't. Because this isn't about money, Marcus. This is about respect. This is about trust. This is about the fact that you've been lying to me for weeks, maybe months, planning to ship me away like an inconvenience you needed to solve. I looked at Brittany, who was standing there with tears streaming down her face, though whether they were tears of regret or frustration at losing out on the inheritance, I couldn't tell. You slapped me tonight, Brittany. In front of all these people, you put your hands on me because I wouldn't give you something that was never yours to begin with. And instead of defending his mother, my son told me to leave. I turned to James, who had been watching this entire scene with the careful attention of someone documenting everything for future reference. James, I need to ask you about something else. In your investigation, did you learn anything about why my grandmother never told my mother about this inheritance? James nodded. According to the documents, Rose Washington was specific about the conditions. The inheritance was only to be released if her descendants faced genuine hardship or need. She didn't want it to change how they lived their lives. She wanted it to be there when they truly needed it. And she was right. I felt tears starting again. But these were different tears. These were tears of gratitude for a woman I'd never fully understood until this moment. She knew that money changes people. She knew that knowing about it might make us weak, might make us dependent. She wanted us to build our own strength first. I looked around the room one more time, taking in all the faces, some shocked, some embarrassed, some calculating what this meant for their own relationships and social standing. I built my own strength, I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. I raised a son alone. I worked for 37 years saving other people's lives. I sacrificed everything so the people I loved could have better lives than I did. And I did it all without knowing there was a safety net waiting for me. I walked over to where Marcus was standing and reached up to touch his face, the way I'd done 1,000 times when he was small and frightened. I love you, Marcus. I will always love you, but I will not allow you to treat me like I'm disposable. I will not allow your wife to assault me and then pretend it was wedding stress, and I will not allow either of you to make decisions about my life without my consent. He caught my hand in both of his, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Mom, please, we can fix this. We can make this right. I looked into his eyes, searching for the son I'd raised, the young man I'd been so proud of just hours earlier. He was still in there, buried under years of Brittany's influence and his own poor choices. But he was still there. Maybe we can, I said softly. But not tonight. Tonight you chose her over me. Tonight you watched her hurt me and told me to leave. Tonight, you proved that you're not ready to be the man I thought I'd raised. I stepped back and turned to James. James, I'd like to go see my grandmother's house now. I think it's time I learned about the woman who made all of this possible. As we walked toward the exit, I heard Brittany's voice behind me, high and desperate. Evelyn, wait. We need to talk about this. We're family. I stopped at the door and turned back one last time. No, Brittany. Family doesn't put each other up for rent. Family doesn't screen each other's phone calls. And family doesn't slap each other and then expect to be forgiven because they just found out about an inheritance. I looked directly at Marcus. When you're ready to apologize, really apologize, not just try to get access to my money, you know where to find me. I'll be in the house your great-great-grandmother built for us. And with that, I walked out of my son's wedding reception for the second time that night. But this time, I wasn't leaving broken and defeated. This time, I was leaving to claim my birthright. The Hartwell mansion stood at 1247 Elm Street, like something from a different century. And when James's Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway, I understood for the first time why my grandmother used to stare out windows with that faraway look in her eyes, like she was seeing something the rest of us couldn't. She hadn't been daydreaming. She'd been remembering home. Evelyn, James said softly as we sat in the car, both of us staring up at the 3-story Victorian house with its wraparound porch and stained glass windows that caught the streetlight like jewels. Are you ready for this? I touched the keys in my hand. Actual keys to a house I owned, a house my grandmother had earned through 24 years of love and service. I don't think anyone could be ready for this. But as we walked up the front steps, I felt something I hadn't expected. Familiarity. The wide porch with its white rocking chairs, the heavy oak door with its brass knocker, the smell of jasmine from the climbing vines. All of it felt like a half-remembered dream, like a story someone had told me so many times it had become my own memory. James unlocked the door, and we stepped into the front hall. I gasped. Every surface was covered with dust sheets, but underneath I could see rich mahogany furniture, oil paintings in golden frames, a crystal chandelier that would have been worth more than my car. But what stopped me cold wasn't the luxury. It was the photographs. Dozens of them, scattered across side tables and mantels, all featuring the same 2 people. A dignified white man with kind eyes and a beautiful black woman who looked exactly like my mother, Grandmother Rose. James, I whispered, picking up a silver-framed photo of Rose standing beside a Christmas tree, wearing a dress I'd never seen but somehow recognized. How is this possible? He was examining the photographs too, his expression soft with something like wonder. According to the documents, Cornelius Hartwell considered Rose family. These weren't employee photos, Evelyn. These were family portraits. I moved through the house like I was walking through my own history. In the dining room, I found a photo of Rose holding a baby, Cornelius's daughter, Helen, who'd been born with developmental disabilities. The love in Rose's face as she looked down at that child was unmistakable. In the study, there was a photo of Rose and Cornelius working together at his desk, papers spread between them, both of them laughing at something. She wasn't standing behind him like a servant. She was sitting beside him like a partner. And in the living room, on the mantelpiece above a fireplace big enough to stand in, there was a photo that made me sink into the nearest chair and weep. It was my mother as a little girl, maybe 8 years old, wearing a white dress and standing between Rose and Cornelius in this very room. He had his hands on both their shoulders, and they all looked like what they were, a family. "She brought my mother here," I said through my tears. "Grandmother Rose brought my mother to this house." James sat down beside me on the dusty sofa. "Evelyn, there's more, much more. Would you like me to show you?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He led me upstairs to what had clearly been Cornelius's bedroom. On the nightstand beside the four-poster bed was a leather journal, its pages yellow with age. James picked it up and opened it to a page marked with a blue ribbon. "This is from 1965, he said, and began to read aloud. "Rose is dying, and I find myself more heartbroken than I was when my dear Margaret passed. This woman has been my anchor for 22 years, the force that held this house together after we lost Margaret and Helen. She raised her daughter Dorothy to be a credit to her race and her family, and I know she worries about what will become of Dorothy's children when she is gone. I have told her repeatedly that this house is as much hers as mine, that the years she has given to my family cannot be repaid with mere wages. When I am gone, when we are both gone, I want her descendants to know what she meant to us. I want them to know they have a place in this world that no one can take from them." James closed the journal and looked at me. "There are dozens of entries like this, Evelyn. This man loved your grandmother like a sister. When his daughter Helen died in 1964, Rose was the only one who could comfort him. When he had his stroke in 1966, Rose nursed him until the end. I felt my chest tighten with emotion so intense I could barely breathe. All those years, when Grandmother Rose would get that look in her eyes, she was missing this place. She was missing him. They were family, in every way that mattered. And when he died, he made sure she would never want for anything. When she died 6 months later, she made sure you would never want for anything." James led me to a window that looked out over the back garden, where I could see rose bushes and fruit trees and a small gazebo surrounded by flower beds. "Rose planted that garden," he said. Cornelius wrote about how she would sit in that gazebo on summer evenings, planning what she wanted to plant the next year, talking about how someday her family would need a place to grow. Someday. The word my grandmother had always used when she talked about the future, the word that had never made sense to me until this moment. "She knew," I whispered. "She knew that someday we'd need this place." As if summoned by my words, my phone rang. Marcus's name flashed on the screen, and I stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Mom." His voice was thick with tears. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I closed my eyes, hearing the little boy in his voice, the son I'd loved before the world taught him to be selfish. "Where are you, Marcus?" "I'm outside your apartment, but there's a moving truck here and strangers packing up your things." "Mom, what did we do? What did I let her do to you?" I looked around the room where my grandmother had been family, where my mother had played as a child, where 3 generations of love had been waiting for me to come home. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Anything, Mom. Anything." The senior community in Florida that Brittany mentioned. Had you already made a deposit? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "Oh, baby," I said, my heart breaking for both of us. "What were you thinking?" "I wasn't thinking." His voice cracked with anguish. "I was just—" "She made it sound like we were helping you. She said you were too proud to admit you were struggling, that we needed to make the hard decisions for you. She said that's what family does." "And the apartment? How long has it been listed?" 2 weeks. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you from having to make painful choices. I thought I was being a good son." I felt James's hand on my shoulder, felt the solid presence of someone who understood what it meant to be saved when you thought you were beyond saving. Marcus, where is Brittany now? She's... He paused, and I could hear voices in the background arguing. She's here with her parents. They're talking about the inheritance, about what it means for the wedding contracts, and... His voice broke completely. Mom, I think I married the wrong person. 29 years of motherhood had prepared me for many things, but not for this moment when my child finally saw clearly and hated what he found. Marcus, listen to me very carefully. I want you to come to 1247 Elm Street. Do you know where that is? Elm Street? That's the fancy part of town. Mom, what? Just come. Come alone. We need to talk, and we need to do it in the place where your great-great-grandmother built the foundation for everything you're about to inherit. I hung up and turned to James, who was watching me with something like pride in his expression. You're going to forgive him, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm going to give him a chance to earn forgiveness, I corrected. There's a difference. 20 minutes later, I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I watched Marcus get out of his Honda and stand there staring up at the house, his face slack with shock. He was still wearing his tuxedo, but his tie was undone and his hair was disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. When he knocked on the door, I let James answer it. Mr. Washington, James said formally, your mother is waiting for you in the living room. Marcus walked into the house like he was entering a cathedral, his eyes wide as he took in the elegant furniture, the artwork, the photographs that told the story of a love that transcended race and class and time. When he saw me sitting in the chair where I'd wept over my mother's photograph, he fell to his knees right there on the Persian rug. Mom, I don't understand any of this, but I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you in ways I can't even comprehend. Please tell me how to fix this. I looked down at my son, my baby, my heart, my greatest accomplishment, and my deepest disappointment. And I made the hardest decision of my life. Marcus, before I can forgive you, you need to understand what you almost took away from me. You need to understand what your great-great-grandmother built and what your wife tried to destroy. For the next hour, I told him everything. About Rose and Cornelius, about the journal entries and the photographs, about 24 years of love that had created this legacy. I told him about the phone calls he'd screened, about the apartment he'd listed, about the systematic way he and Brittany had tried to erase me from my own life. When I finished, he was sobbing. I betrayed everything you taught me, he whispered. I betrayed everything Grandmother Rose built. I became the kind of man who throws away family for money. No, I said firmly. You became the kind of man who lets fear make his decisions. Fear of not being enough. Fear of not having enough. Fear of losing someone who never loved you the way you deserved to be loved. I knelt down beside him on that expensive rug in the house my grandmother had earned with love. Marcus, I need you to make a choice. Right now, tonight, you need to choose who you want to be. Do you want to be the man who stands by while his wife abuses his mother? Or do you want to be the man who honors the legacy of the strongest woman who ever lived? He looked up at me through his tears, and for the first time in years, I saw my son clearly. I want to be worthy of you, Mom. I want to be worthy of Rose. I want to be the man Dad would have been proud of. I took his face in my hands, the way I'd done when he was small, and needed to understand something important. Then you need to go home to your wife and tell her that your mother will not be managed, manipulated, or moved anywhere she doesn't want to go. You need to tell her that if she ever puts her hands on me again, she'll answer to you. And you need to decide if you want to be married to someone who thinks love is about control instead of respect. Marcus nodded, his eyes clear and determined for the first time all night. And Marcus? Yes, Mom? This inheritance? Every penny of it came from love. If you want to be part of it, you need to prove that you understand what love actually means. He stood up slowly, looking around the room one more time before meeting my eyes. I understand, Mom. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of the love you and Grandmother Rose built. As he walked toward the door, I called after him. Marcus? He turned back. I love you, baby. I always will. But I will never again let anyone, not even you, make me smaller so they can feel bigger. After he left, James and I sat in comfortable silence in the living room, where my grandmother had been family, where my mother had played, where I had finally come home. "What happens now?" I asked. James smiled. "Now you live, Evelyn. You live the life your grandmother dreamed for you. You become the woman she always knew you could be." I looked at the photograph of Rose on the mantelpiece, and I swear I could see her smiling. "Thank you, grandmother," I whispered. "Thank you for believing I was worth saving." 6 months later, I was sitting in Rose's gazebo, watching the sunrise paint the sky pink and gold over the garden she'd planted 50 years ago, when I heard the front gate creak open and footsteps on the gravel path. I knew those footsteps. Marcus appeared around the corner of the house carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the same nervous expression he'd had as a little boy when he was bringing me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day. He'd been coming every Saturday morning for 3 months now, and we were slowly rebuilding something that felt like family. "Morning, Mom," he said, handing me one of the cups. "French roast, just like you taught me." "Morning, baby." I took the coffee and gestured to the chair beside me. "How are you doing?" It had become our weekly ritual: coffee in the gazebo, honest conversation, and the slow work of healing what had been broken. Marcus looked older now, more thoughtful, like someone who'd learned the difference between growing up and simply getting older. "I'm getting there," he said, settling into his chair. "The divorce was finalized yesterday." I nodded, unsurprised. Brittany had shown her true colors the morning after the wedding, when she'd arrived at my apartment building with her parents and a lawyer, demanding to know about prenups and inheritance rights. She'd been furious to discover that Marcus had no legal claim to my inheritance, and even more furious when he'd refused to pressure me into sharing it with them. "How do you feel about that?" I asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching a cardinal build its nest in the apple tree Rose had planted. Relieved mostly, and ashamed that it took me so long to see who she really was. Or maybe ashamed that I saw it and chose to ignore it because I was afraid of being alone. These conversations weren't easy, but they were necessary. We'd spent too many years avoiding difficult truths, and I was determined that we'd never do that again. "Fear makes us do things we never thought we would," I said, "but it's what we do after we recognize the fear that defines who we really are." "Is that why you moved me out of the inheritance?" I turned to look at him, surprised by the directness of the question. "What do you mean?" "James told me you've restructured everything, that I'm not your primary beneficiary anymore." I smiled, remembering the conversation I'd had with James 3 months ago. "I didn't move you out, Marcus. I created something better." From my purse, I pulled out a legal document that James had prepared for me. "This is the Rose Washington Foundation for Family Support. It provides financial assistance to single mothers who are working in healthcare, education, or social services. Women who are raising children alone and need help with housing, education, or emergency expenses." Marcus read the document, his eyebrows rising as he took in the scope of what I'd created. "Mom, this is incredible. But what about me? What about your family?" "You are my family, Marcus. But you're also a grown man with a college education and a good job. You don't need me to take care of you anymore." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "But there are hundreds of women out there who are exactly where I was 30 years ago, working double shifts to keep food on the table, wondering how they're going to pay for their children's education, afraid of what happens if they get sick or injured and can't work. Like Grandmother Rose was before she found the Hartwells. Exactly like Grandmother Rose. This foundation ensures that other women don't have to depend on the kindness of strangers. They'll have a place to turn when they need help." Marcus was quiet for a long time, studying the document. "And what about the house? What about all of this?" "The house stays in the family. When I'm gone, it becomes yours. But with a condition. It has to remain the headquarters for the foundation. Promise me that, Marcus. Promise me that this house will always be a place where love multiplies instead of divides." "I promise, Mom." His voice was thick with emotion. "I promise I'll never let anyone use this place for anything other than what Grandmother Rose intended." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the birds in Rose's garden and watching the sun climb higher in the sky. It was Marcus who broke the silence. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think Dad would be proud of the man I'm becoming? Or disappointed in the man I became?" I thought about Thomas, about the gentle way he'd corrected Marcus when he was small, about the values he'd tried to instill in the brief 8 years he'd had with his son. Thomas had believed in second chances, in the power of love to transform people, in the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Your father would be proud of your willingness to change, I said. He always said that the measure of a man isn't whether he makes mistakes, but whether he learns from them and becomes better because of them. I want to be better, Mom. I want to be the kind of man who deserves to be Rose's great-great-grandson. You already are, baby. The fact that you're here, that you're asking these questions, that you chose to rebuild our relationship instead of just walking away when things got hard. That's exactly the kind of man she would have been proud of. As if summoned by our conversation about the future, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and couldn't help but smile. What is it? Marcus asked. A thank you note from Maria Santos. She's the first recipient of a foundation grant. Single mother, working as a nurse's aide, trying to go back to school to become an RN. The foundation paid for her childcare and textbooks this semester. I showed him the photo Maria had sent, herself in scrubs, standing outside the nursing school, holding her acceptance letter and grinning ear to ear. She looks like you did in your graduation photos, Marcus said softly. She reminds me of me 30 years ago, determined, hardworking, and just needing someone to believe in her potential. I put my phone away and looked at my son. That's what Grandmother Rose gave me, Marcus. Not just money, but the knowledge that I was worth investing in, that my dreams mattered, that my future had value. And now you're giving that to other people. Now we're giving that to other people. This foundation isn't just mine, Marcus. When you're ready, when you've proven that you understand what family really means, I want you to help me run it. Marcus stared at me with something like wonder in his eyes. You'd trust me with something that important? I'd trust you with everything important. But first, you need to finish proving it to yourself. We were interrupted by the sound of another car in the driveway. Through the garden, I could see James's Mercedes pulling up to the house, and beside him in the passenger seat was a young woman with curly hair and a bright smile. That must be Zoe, I said, standing up and smoothing my dress. James is bringing his daughter to see the garden. She's studying botany at college, and he thought she'd appreciate seeing what Rose created here. As we walked back toward the house, Marcus caught my arm gently. Mom? Yes? Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for loving me enough to hold me accountable. I stopped walking and turned to face him fully. Marcus Washington, you are my son. You are Thomas's son. You are Rose's great-great-grandson. You come from a long line of people who believed in love, in family, in doing what's right even when it's hard. I never gave up on you because giving up was never an option. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. Always. James and Zoe were waiting for us on the front porch, and I could see the awe in the young woman's eyes as she looked around at the house and grounds. Mrs. Washington, she said, stepping forward with the confidence of someone raised by a man who'd taught her to value strength in women. Dad's told me so much about you and about your grandmother. Would you mind if I took some photos of the garden? I'm writing my senior thesis on sustainable horticulture practices, and from what Dad's described, your grandmother was ahead of her time. She was ahead of her time in many ways, I said, liking this young woman immediately. And please, call me Evelyn. Mrs. Washington was my grandmother. We spent the next hour walking through Rose's garden, while Zoe took photographs and asked questions about the plants, the soil composition, the natural pest control methods Rose had used. Watching her excitement reminded me of the joy I'd felt discovering my heritage in this house 6 months ago. Evelyn, Zoe said as we stood beside the herb garden where Rose had grown remedies for the family she'd cared for. I hope this isn't too personal, but Dad told me about what happened at the wedding, about how you found out about your inheritance. I glanced at James, who shrugged apologetically. I may have mentioned it during one of our father-daughter talks about the importance of treating people with respect. It's all right, I said. What about it interests you, Zoe? I guess I'm amazed by your strength. Dad said you walked away from people who were treating you badly, even though it meant walking away from your son's wedding. That took incredible courage. I considered her words carefully. It wasn't courage, honey. It was self-respect. I'd spent too many years making myself smaller so other people could feel bigger. Sometimes you have to be willing to stand alone before you can find the people who are willing to stand with you. Zoe nodded thoughtfully. Like your grandmother did when she chose to love Mr. Hartwell's family, even though society told her she shouldn't. exactly like that. Rose understood that love isn't about following other people's rules. It's about recognizing worth and value wherever you find it, and choosing to nurture it even when it's difficult. As the afternoon wore on, we found ourselves back in the gazebo where I'd started my day. James was showing Marcus some of the legal documents related to the foundation, while Zoe and I sat together watching the shadows lengthen across the garden. "Evelyn," Zoe said quietly, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? Standing up for yourself that night even though it meant losing your relationship with your son for a while?" I thought about the question, really thought about it. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman whose son was planning to ship her off to Florida without her knowledge, whose daughter-in-law had assaulted her in front of 130 people, who'd been told she was an inconvenience to be managed and discarded. Today, I was a woman who owned a mansion and a legacy, who was using her inheritance to help other women find their strength, who had rebuilt her relationship with her son on a foundation of mutual respect instead of obligation. "Never," I said firmly. "Not once." Because that night taught me something crucial. You can't control how other people treat you, but you can control whether you accept it. And once I stopped accepting disrespect, I found out who really loved me and who was just using me. "And your son?" I looked over at Marcus, who was listening intently as James explained the tax implications of charitable giving. My son had to learn that love isn't about possession or control. He had to learn the difference between a mother who enables and a mother who empowers. It took time, but we're building something stronger now. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that seemed fitting for a garden planted by a woman named Rose, James and Zoe prepared to leave. "Evelyn," James said, shaking my hand in that formal way of his that somehow conveyed deep respect. "Thank you for letting us share this afternoon with you. This place, this legacy, what you're building here, it's exactly what your grandmother would have wanted." "How do you know?" I asked, curious. James smiled. "Because in all those journal entries Cornelius wrote about Rose, he mentioned one thing over and over. She always said her greatest dream was to plant seeds that would grow long after she was gone. Seeds of love, of hope, of opportunity." I looked around the garden where Rose had literally planted seeds that were still blooming 50 years later, and I understood that she'd planted other kinds of seeds too. Seeds of dignity, of self-worth, of the belief that every person deserves to be treated with respect and love. "She did plant seeds," I said, "and now it's my job to tend them." After James and Zoe left, Marcus and I stood together on the front porch of the house that love built, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Mom," Marcus said quietly, "I have something to tell you." "What's that, baby?" "I've been volunteering at the women's shelter downtown, helping with their job training program, teaching basic computer skills. I wanted to understand the work you're doing with the foundation, and I wanted to meet some of the women you're helping." I felt my heart swell with pride. "And what have you learned?" "I've learned that strength looks like a lot of different things. I've met women who left abusive marriages with nothing but their children and their determination. I've met mothers who work 3 jobs and still find time to help their kids with homework. I've met grandmothers who are raising their grandchildren and somehow still manage to smile every day." He paused, looking out over the garden where his great-great-grandmother had worked and dreamed and loved. "And I've learned that I want to spend my life helping people instead of just helping myself. I want to be worthy of this legacy, Mom. I want to be worthy of you." I reached for his hand, feeling the strength in his fingers, the steadiness that came from a man who'd found his purpose. "You already are, Marcus. You already are." As we stood there together in the place where Rose had dreamed of a better future for her family, I felt the profound satisfaction of a woman who'd lived long enough to see love win. Love had built this house. Love had preserved this legacy, and love would continue to multiply through every life we touched with the foundation. The little girl who'd grown up hearing her grandmother's stories about someday had finally understood what someday looked like. Not a day when all the pain was erased, but a day when all the pain had purpose. I thought about Brittany, who'd lost everything she'd tried to manipulate her way into getting. I thought about the wedding guests who'd watched an older black woman get slapped and said nothing. I thought about the people who'd been ready to ship me off to Florida like an inconvenience to be discarded, and I felt not anger, but pity, because they'd missed the opportunity to witness something beautiful, a woman discovering her worth, a family rebuilding itself on a foundation of respect, a legacy of love continuing to grow and flourish decades after the woman who planted it had returned to the earth. "Come on," I said to Marcus, squeezing his hand. "Let's go inside. I want to show you some more of Rose's journals. I think you're ready to read about the woman who made all of this possible." As we walked into the house together, I heard Rose's voice in the evening breeze rustling through her garden, whispering the words she'd always used when she talked about the future. Someday. And someday, I realized, was today. I realized